So recently I was watching this video, Deconstructing the Fall of Adam and Eve with Alex O'Connor and Jonathan Pageau. Alex takes part of the argument as an atheist, and Jonathan is an Orthodox Christian. Alex wanted to know why God created the snake in the first place, and then why didn't he warn Adam and Eve about him so that they could remain sinless and eat of the tree of life. So this is a very long discussion. It's a very good discussion. I encourage you to watch it. But at the end, Alex remains unconvinced that God, being a loving God, should have allowed death into our reality. And since this fits in with our discussion of the 5 known unknowns, specifically the third one, something must die so that I may live, I think this is a good place to begin our discussion today. So let's get started. So this is my list of 5 known unknowns. This could be people can add and subtract to this list. These are what I think are important, especially in this time, to be open to discussion. We discussed number 1 and number 2 a little bit in videos 10 and 11, but we haven't spent much time on the last 3. Most education books, if they tackle these subjects at all, do so at the end of the books. But I really believe that this is subject matter that needs to be discussed at the beginning before you even go to talk about how you're going to, what materials you're going to use and how you're going to teach them, because you have these questions come up in history and literature. They can even come up in the sciences. We need to be able to address the different approaches to reality in order to form a comprehensive educational program. Here's a brief summary from Copilot. The fall of Adam and Eve refers to the biblical event in which they disobeyed God by eating from the tree of knowledge, leading to their expulsion from the Garden of Eden. This act of disobedience, influenced by the serpent, represents the transition from a state of innocent obedience to one of guilty disobedience. As a consequence, God invoked curses on them, drove them out of the garden, and placed a cherub to guard the entrance, preventing their return. This event is often interpreted as the origin of sin and the human condition in Christian theology. So I'm going to add some things that I feel might help people understand what is going on in this story. All right, so we're going to listen from Jonathan a little bit about the beginning of the story in Genesis before Adam and Eve entered the picture.
God takes the dust and then puts air inside. It's the first time in the whole text where he actually puts heaven in earth. Until then, it's like this weird relationship of duality between order and chaos that kind of move closer
and the bottom.
closer.
And here the top and the bottom come together.
Yeah, exactly.
Into man.
And they come together in man, and he gathers the earth together and he blows air into it. And now you have a living being. And so that structure gets repeated again in the text constantly. Then in the garden is the same structure. You have a tree and you have a serpent. A tree is an image of order, like an image of structure. It's a fractal, right? It's a fractal structure. And then you have a snake, and a snake is an image of change. It's an image of changes its skin. It's like it can be in 2 places at the same time. It's shifty, it's shrewd. It's an image of chaos. Like the idea that a snake is the image of chaos, I hope you can see that this is something that is pretty universal. Like in every culture, this kind of giant sea serpent, this Leviathan type slithering thing that kind of moves and shifts and is coils itself and is an image of a chaotic or strangeness of being, and so that's what's there in the garden. The garden is just a microcosm of what was being said from the beginning.
All right. So first thing I want to say about this video is that was a conversation, not a true debate. They were trying to come to terms with what they both understood about the story. So it wasn't antagonistic in any way. And, with all conversations and people have 20/20 hindsight when they go back to look over it. Many of the commenters who were Christian wanted to know why Jonathan didn't bring up free will. And I don't really think that would have helped too much, because I think Alex is open to that concept, but it's not obvious to him how that would solve the problem of why things are the way they are, why there is death in our as part of our human experience. It's part of all living experience. It was a really good, fascinating discussion, and it opened up many insights into the thinking on both sides. So we're going to look at it from both ends. It's kind of easy for me because I was raised a Christian, a Methodist, and then I was an atheist or agnostic for a long time, and then I'm a Catholic, or at least culturally Catholic right now. So I do see the issues, I think, a little clearer than those who have not gone through those phases.
Let's just.
I guess I'm not understanding what this
Let's start from
in the garden
again. Let's start from the beginning. God creates heaven and earth. He creates order and chaos. He creates name, essence, purpose, identity, and then potentiality and darkness and chaos, right? And then in the scripture account, he repeats that over and over. He does that. He keeps doing that. So he creates something below, which is akin to variation. And then he creates something above, which is akin to order. And he keeps doing that as he moves towards man. So he creates heaven and earth, right? Then he creates, interesting enough, he creates the grass, and he creates stars, right? And then he creates birds, and he creates fish. And then he creates.
And why do you said
tame animals and wild animals? Like, what kind of categorization is that for a biologist? That's a silly categorization. Like, why would you create
so you've got
tame animals and wild animals? He's creating
this idea of order and chaos, right? But what about like the you said the grass and the stars, or the birds and the fish? Why is it that the birds are sort of order and the fish are chaos? You know what I mean?
Because the birds are in the light and the fish are in the darkness. You really have to break if you want to if your purpose is to understand this story, like, you have to break out of your reductionist frame. Like, you just have to break out of it.
This is what Jonathan Pageau is talking about in this video. All right, these Plato's ideas impose themselves, the designs of the creator impose themselves down on the world. And Aristotle says, yes, but we categorize things, and we separate things out, and we put things together, the material world together. So Aristotle represents, although he did talk about other things, he generally is more concerned with our observations of the world, the scientific and physical nature of the world. All right, that's how we see him. Of course, he did also believe in the immaterial world, but he was more focused on this end of it. This little section here, this is the center section of a larger painting called The School of Athens, that has a lot of philosophers in it. And these two take up the center and most important focus of the painting. All right, because this is where we believe our Western ideas of philosophy started. It was with Plato and Aristotle. So they're very prominent in our thought. If you remove the vertical, this idea that there's an immaterial plane of our reality, you are left with just the material. All right, and this cutting off of the immaterial is often called reductionism. That is, everything is reduced down to its physical attributes, not its immaterial attributes. They're not considered at all, because in science we can't measure immaterial attributes, and so we tend to ignore them. And we tend to ignore them so much that we stop believing that they exist. All right, so I've talked about this in previous videos, so if you want to go over that, go back to those two videos. This is important understanding of why the atheist and the theist continuously talk past each other. If you're a theist, you believe in God, you believe in a creator, or you believe in the immaterial of some way, trying to convince someone who doesn't recognize that vertical plane exists at all is very hard. I mean, Alex is open to the ideas of the immaterial. I do believe that, but it's got no place in his mind map. I guess that's the best way to put it. We have a map of reality, how we view reality, but the vertical plane doesn't really exist in his. Everything, and I know this because, I feel that because I experienced that myself as an agnostic or atheist. I was there. So you try to lift your thoughts up to this idea that there's something coming down, all right, or this immaterial plane, and you can just about get there, and then it just kind of just fades away, because it's not really in your map. It's just not there. Whereas an atheist, he's got both that vertical and that horizontal plane. So he's always going back and forth between them, just as Jonathan talks about God coming from above and coming from below, and these things mix and mix and mix until finally they meet, and God infuses life into the immaterial, in the inanimate objects that He's creating man out of, the dust. Okay. So, what I'm trying to say for theists, you telling the other side that they're being reductionists, that they're, either saying or implying that their interpretation is simplistic, you're not getting at the root of their issue. Okay. I'm not saying that you don't say that it's reductionism. Okay. I'm just saying that I think that you probably have to lay those cards on the table because you want to be honest too, that you believe that you believe what they're saying is reductionist. However, don't think that that's going to win any points. It's not going to land. It's just not going to land on them at all. There's nothing in their map again that's going to allow that to stick. All right. Okay.
Problem in the Christian tradition for me is that Genesis can't just be an attempt to sort of describe, hey, the world as you find it, and offer a sort of a narrative account of our psychological feelings towards the world. It has to also say that this character, this Lord God, is the intentional creator of this system. He had reasons to make things the way that they are. The fact that a knowledge of good and evil will lead to increased pain in childbirth, for example, seems something contingent, right? When you are God, when you're the creator of the universe, it seems like it didn't have to be that way. And so, when you say, well, that's just the world you're in, I agree, but I'm not the one who believes that there's a God who sort of ordained that things be that way. You see what I'm saying?
I mean, I kind of see what you're saying, but not really, in the sense that first off, the text is, how can I say it? The text is a description of what happened. It's not just someone who sat around and made up, this story. I don't think anybody made up this story. It's not a scientific description. It's not in any ways the type of description that modern people like, but it is a description I think it is a description of an event. It's not an event in the banal sense, because it's in some ways a meta event, but it is a description of something that happened. And how can I say this? It's like, there is no other way for the world to exist besides the relationship between unity and multiplicity. Because it is the very core of how identities function. And so identities, the one of the identity is made up of the multiple of its parts. And that's actually the very source of how something exists. And so to give a story that gives, really, it's giving a metaphysics, it's giving a manner in which the world exists, right? The relationship between unity and name and meaning and spirit, all of these things, and the relationship between multiplicity and death and chaos, variation, change. That's what the story is talking about. And so it isn't an arbitrary God that just arbitrarily decides the world functions that way. There is no other world you can conceive of besides the world that is being described in Genesis. Like, I'd like to hear of another world that is not made up of the joining of unity and multiplicity, in which, if multiplicity is given free rein, then it will annul the unity and will lead to it'll lead to
sorry
division
to interrupt,
and
but
the breakdown of identity.
So tell me, help me understand this. What's wrong with the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, trees that they're eating of, maybe even still the tree of knowledge of good and evil that they can't eat from, that if they eat of it, everything's going to go wrong, but there's no serpent.
So this is why Alex continuously wants to know why the snake exists when God could choose not to make the snake exist. And on the other side, Jonathan is saying it's not about whether God could make the snake exist or not. It's that the snake exists. All right, this concept of the strangeness of our, of where we are in our state in life. That sometimes we're aligned with the spiritual side, the immaterial side of God, and sometimes we're not. And it's not so much that we're aligned with material, but we are aligned. We're out of adjustment, basically. Okay, and this is the explanation of why. But that's not what Alex is interested. He's still focused on why is there death? That is really, I think that's really his question. Why did God allow death? Because it's just so bad. Why couldn't we just live in utopia forever? All right, so we want to talk about that next. This very question that Alex asks about the snake is actually brought up by C.S. Lewis and answered in his trilogy, the Perelandra trilogy. It's kind of science fiction-y. I don't like it. I think I'm glad that he takes up the question and tries to answer it. All right, well, here's a brief summary of the first two books. So a man from Earth named Ransom ends up on Mars. And here he just finds out that the angels, the equivalent of angels on Mars, disobeyed God and the entire planet was destroyed. So it's sort of like God's first try at this whole salvation thing. And then, of course, we know the story of Earth, our Christian story of how Adam and Eve disobeyed God, and then Christ came and gave us salvation. And then the second book of the trilogy, this guy goes to Venus. And there, it's before the fall. We have a third race. His idea was that each race would have a chance to play out its own salvation story. And in this case, the guy from Earth gets to save the Venusian Eve from making the same mistake. It's a similar set of circumstances. They're not allowed to go sleep on some island. And, if they do, they'll know good and evil. And so this guy convinces Eve not to disobey God and to, not fall for the trap, the snake's trap. So that's basically how that story goes. Okay, so, and I don't really think that this is going to answer Alex's question either. I don't think C.S. Lewis's story answers any questions. It's, so what? So what that Venus doesn't have to go through all the crap that we have to go through. We still have to go through it. It's why couldn't he have warned us? So it doesn't answer Alex's question. And as a utopian vision, I think it fails too. And I'm going to explain why. I think as an alternate history, an alternate planetary history, an alternate species history, as C.S. Lewis puts it, that every species would have to have its own solution, why it also fails. Okay, and I think this more easily seen if you're a parent. Making a cut against people who are childless or have nothing to do with children. That's not where I'm going here. This is just that when you have children and grandchildren, you see this pattern repeat itself. Part of what's going on in the Adam and Eve story is about children growing up. All right. Okay. When you have a child, an infant, there's a lot of harmony there. Okay. The baby is innocent. He can't get upset. He can't fight against you. I mean, yes, they cry and everything, but the baby identifies with you. The baby doesn't see itself separate from you. So there's this unity here. So this is what's going on in the garden. You have God and Adam and Eve. They're all together. They're all one. This is why they don't see themselves as naked, just as an infant doesn't see itself as naked, doesn't see you as clothed or naked. Just that doesn't even enter the picture. You're all united as one. Okay. But the infant has no, I mean, of course, they all have personalities, but it's not a developed personality. And you see this in the first year. Okay, as the child begins to grow, he begins to recognize that he has a separate body from you. He starts to notice his hands. He spends hours looking and manipulating his hands and his body. He's surprised to see himself in the mirror. He begins to recognize that he's a separate person. All right, so this is what's going on in the garden. At this point, we're starting to see a separation. There's a natural growth to the human beings. As the baby grows, the baby you get to the first year, you get to the second year, you get into the terrible twos. This is where the child wants what he wants when he wants it, and want they own you. That's just the way they look at it. They believe that you've always done these things for them. Why are you not doing them all the time for them now? And they just throw a fit because they're emotionally immature and they don't know how to handle their emotions at all. So this is where you start training. So you start setting down rules. No, if you're going to continue to cry like this, you're going to end up in the playpen, and we're just going to calm down. And then, you pick them up and you hold them and everything. So you're training them to begin to control their emotions. And you reward, you try to reward good behavior with, what you need. And it doesn't always work. They're two. Okay, there's a lot of give and take between the two. But this is where the rules start to be laid down. And this is what God does. He's laying down the rule. No, you're not going to eat of the tree of good and evil. I mean, how many times does a 2-year-old ask you for candy? All right, I want to have candy. I want to know what this tastes like. I want to do this, blah, blah, blah. And they just keep at it and at it and at it. So God says, nope, it's not going to happen. All right. So there's already a little bit of tension going on here. And we've seen this for generations, since the beginning of time and the beginning of our awareness, that this is the way we develop. So as Jonathan says in this video, this is a pattern that repeats itself. It's not that it's Adam and Eve. It's human beings. At some point, we reached a stage of evolution, if you believe in evolution, where we are aware that we're separate people, separate from God. Are animals so much aware? I mean, I suppose they are to some degree, but not to the way that humans are. And this is what Jonathan talks about, that we start to question all of these things. And so in enters the snake. Okay. All right. This happens now for when you're raising children. This begins to happen around 6 or 7. You ask them, did they brush their teeth? Did they do this or not do this? And some children will tell you the truth because that's their personality, and some children will tell you what they think you want to hear. This is just easier for everybody. They're that kind of, they have that kind of personality that they want to charm their way through life. Okay. There's nothing wrong with either personality. We need all different kinds of personalities, but you have to treat them differently. And eventually you recognize the child is not telling you the truth, and you have to encourage them that the truth is more important than making me feel good. Okay. So, or the parent feeling good. All right. The child or the parent feeling good. That is not the solution to this particular problem. They need to tell what's really going on so that their teeth don't rot out of their head. All right. And then around 6 or then again, as they get to be 6 or 7, they become aware that they can make a choice about whether to tell the truth or not. They know that they should tell the truth, but they decide not to. Okay, so this is where they have reached the stage where they can break their unity with you completely, and they will. All right. So this is not a surprise to anybody who's raised children. Adam and Eve it's kind of a recursive story. It's a pattern that happens again and again and again. I think one of the things AI, although I don't like it, one of the things it has shown is how repetitious many of our actions and our speech are. All right. We don't recognize it as being so repetitious, but it is, because that's part of communicating, this constant reinforcing of, our thoughts and our behaviors and our manners towards each other. All right. All right, and so we're seeing the same progression in the story of Adam and Eve. They become aware that they have done something not in harmony with God, what as God has asked them. And that's when they realize they're naked. They start to realize a whole lot of things about themselves and their relationship with each other and with God, and then they blame each other. They blame the serpent, Adam blames Eve. And then, we have the consequences. I think that this might be what Alex is missing from the story. In order to achieve his full potential as a human being, but unified in God, he must undergo this separation, this little rebellion, and then work back towards unity. Because this is what happens in our family life. All right, their children move away from us. The teenage years are horrible, and in their 20s they're delightful again. Okay, hopefully. If not, the utopian vision offered by C.S. Lewis would leave him as a puppet of God, not a unique individual. So if they didn't break away, they wouldn't become their own person. They would not be able to exercise their own will. And this is an important development in human beings' existence and his, his purpose, his whole telos. And this is an important thing to get across for them, that this separation, this being led out of the garden, this of the home, the safety of the home, out into the cruel world where you learn that everybody's got an agenda. Everything you meet seems to be a transaction. That there's no real love for human beings. You have to rediscover all those things all over again and in a new way. And if you don't do this, you don't undergo suffering. There can be no growth. This is the big lessons of this known unknown, that something must die so that I may live. Well, it's a little bit of dying inside yourself so that you may live. This constant reinforcement of sacrifice and growth. It has to happen. Our entire reality around us is a constant illustration of this. Crops die, soil has to be replenished, rain has to fall, and there's a season for everything that's in the Bible. This constant reinforcement of life and death and growth and new life. This what Jonathan was trying to tell Alex, that this is a story of our reality, not a what if story. Okay, it is what it is. This is why Alex is so hung up on it. But as I said, if God had given us utopia, we wouldn't be human beings. That's pretty much how that story plays out. I know a lot of people would prefer, it's the Peter Pan story. Do you want to grow up or not? I know it's a very harsh thing to say, that it's an immature view of the world. This is how a theist is going to see that. See Alex's reaction. I'm not trying to come down on Alex. This is a very common viewpoint among atheists, that God is not good. All right, that he is so why would you believe in him? And I think mostly the time they don't want to believe in God is not because they don't want to believe in a creator that loves them. They just don't believe he does. And so they would rather not believe in someone who doesn't love them than accept someone who doesn't love them. We understand what I'm saying? A little bit more on death and sacrifice in this video. There's a lot of other questions covered. I hope to go over some of them in further videos. We have the closing of the garden with the angels with flaming swords. I think Jonathan does a good job of explaining why that's so. That's not a punishment. That's because they're in a bad state. They can't eat of the tree of life, so they have to go out of the garden. This again is the thing. It's not so much a punishment as it's consequences. You did this. It's like getting pregnant. You had sex. Now you're pregnant. This is what's going to happen. All right. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, when you do something, there are consequences, good and bad, to the things that you do. And they were in a state of which they need to restore themselves to the proper order. Well, we call this redemption. It's also restoration. All right. So they have an opportunity to restore themselves to a proper state before they eat of the tree of life. Okay. Which comes through death. All right. Now, in a previous video, we also did talk about change. Talk about a little bit from a physical point of view. Maybe this will help people who have trouble seeing the immaterial part of reality. Okay, if there's no movement, there's no growth, without change. Without one generation dying off, there'd be no room for growth of the next generation. Aren't younger generations now complaining that boomers and Gen X are gumming up the works for millennials and Gen Z? I mean, in our youth culture, we think, old people have no consequence. Yet we complain that they pull all the strings. I mean, our generation did it to the older generations too. So, that's another cycle that plays itself out. And imagine a human tyrant spending, he's there forever and he is consolidating power forever. So death has a way of leveling the playing field for everybody. All right. So, I mean, this is a reason why death is necessary for the human species to evolve. And then the possibility of an afterlife and discarding the problems of the material world. Just because it's a comforting thought doesn't mean it's not a real thought. This is another problem. People are afraid that the comforting thought is the one to be avoided because it might be wrong. We don't want to comfort ourselves too much because if we're wrong, then that takes away our security blanket. Well, just because it's comforting, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong either. All right. Whether you're a theist or not a theist, don't be squeamish about scripture. It contains a lot of wisdom. It's time to start looking at our old wisdom literature with new eyes. There's stuff in there that tells us things that we've always questioned from the beginning of time. It gives us a feeling of continuity over the ages, that we belong somewhere in this history of the human race. All right. That's all for now. See you next time.